this is our higher education panel. And we want to talk about the connection between Brown and higher education. But I think it's important to note that Brown was not the case that dealt with higher education. There was a case before that. It was McLaurin versus Oklahoma. And it was handed down on June 5th, 1950. Bill McLaurin was an African-American man who got a master's degree from the University of Oklahoma, and he wanted to get a doctorate. They set up a Byzantine, see, racists have to have really kind of crazy brains, because how do you think that stuff up? But they set up a very Byzantine system up where they had the man sitting outside the classroom. They had a desk in a library reserved for him. He could not eat in the cafeteria, and that was considered separate but equal. The outside the classroom thing especially strikes me as fascinating, given what Nicole talked about in terms of being in the same classroom. Part of what we do in higher ed is we engage in discourse. Part of the work is the conversation. So when you have someone who is not allowed to be in the room, but they're sitting outside, they can get the lecture, but they don't get the exchange. So in any case, McLaurin sued, and he won. Just about every state, especially southern states, had similar restrictions. Reverend talked about Arthurine Lucy, who finally, after all these years, the University of Alabama granted her a degree. She's 90 now or something. I don't know if she's 90 or not. She's old. But anyway, and the degree is not going to be put to use. She actually was a colleague when I taught at San Francisco State University a lifetime ago. She was one of the administrators, but just this year they decided to give her her degree. My mom was actually the first African American to teach at the University of Mississippi. She and another woman were hired. They had not had any black teachers before 1975 when Mom went there, and we had to get her out of there because Oxford, Mississippi was literally so racist that she had to go to Memphis to go to the doctor. And so, I'd be like, Mom, you got to come home. And Jeanette Jennings, the other woman who was hired at the same time, ended up staying at Ole Miss. But in any case, the levels of segregation that remain. There's a high school in Mississippi, I told you all about it, but there's a high school in Mississippi that just merged the two high schools. And then the black girl who qualified to be a salutatorian, she had the second highest GPA. She did not get that honor because they wanted to have racial balance. So the white boy, who was third, became the salutatorian, which meant that this young lady lost all kind of scholarship opportunities. As an example, Ole Miss has a scholarship for salutatorians. So she couldn't get it because she wasn't the salutatorian, even though she was second, but because of racial balance, they wanted the white boy to be the salutatorian. We could go on and on and on. The point is that this segregation is not over with, and there are other ways that it rears its ugly head in higher education. One of the ways that I think about is the relative isolation of black doctoral students. We have so few black doctoral students that often you'll find one in a program or two. Indeed, an organization called the Black Doctoral Network started about 8 years ago. Cornel West and I are considered the godparents of the organization because we were on the founding board. But it was founded because so many young people felt isolated, and it was a way for all these young folks to come together and to talk to people across discipline and across campuses. So what we know about higher ed, from my perspective, is that it has changed in many ways, and in many ways it stays the same. In 2000, here's my number, 76% of those enrolled in institutions of higher education were Caucasian. By 2016, that number had dropped to 65.2%. That's a significant change. It's not all African American at all. In fact, African Americans represent about 10% of those enrolled. The Latino number is about 10 or 11. They're very close. The Asian Americans, others. But it's very interesting. In this changed demographic in higher education, the question becomes, what else has changed? Are there resource allocation changes? Has campus civility changed? I mean, one of the things that's a big deal right now is campus civility. Y'all should know, just as a footnote, this is interesting. Crazy white people at Westboro Baptist Church, so Roland Martin does this thing all the time called crazy blank white people. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Crazy white people have decided to boycott the Spelman and Morehouse graduations tomorrow from this Westboro Baptist Church because they respond positive to LGBTQ students. So Morehouse just had a policy that Transgender students will be allowed. If you identify as a male, you can apply to Morehouse. And Spelman has an LGBTQ, okay, I got it wrong. But anyway, they have basically a diversity coordinator that focuses on GBLTQ issues. So these people are boycotting these graduates. I just hope they run into the Wright Morehouse brothers. I want them to roll up on the Wright Morehouse brother as they try to boycott his baby girl or baby boy graduation, so they can just teach them a lesson. These folks have more bark than bite. They do this actually to get publicity. They boycotted a friend of mine's mother's funeral, actually. Cora Masters-Berry, who's the former First Lady of Washington, D.C., her brother is the mayor of West Palm Beach, Florida. And he passed a basically anti-gay discrimination ordinance. So they went to boycott his mama's funeral. You know, I was like, come on, bring it. And all they had was like 8 or 9 little scraggly looking white people. Scraggly looking white. It's like, y'all call yourself a boycott? Y'all just pitiful. I told them, I said, here's $1, go buy a hamburger. You know, I mean, in any case, but they're boycotting the Spelman and Morehouse graduations. Campuses have become, all the issues that we're dealing with in the real world have become campus issues in terms of civility, exchange, and all of those things. We want to connect to Brown, but I also want to get a sense from each of these panelists about what's going on their campuses in these terms. While I mentioned that, let me say that I think that some of the greatest challenges of higher ed right now are 31% of all colleges met their enrollment goals last fall. So many schools are grappling with declining enrollments. If they're public universities, they're grappling with decreased state funding. If they're whether public or private, Reverend Jackson has mentioned the Pell Grant situation where some schools will know whether the Orange Man is going to appropriate Pell money for something else. Makes no sense, but it's what's happening. And we know that the Pell has not raised significantly since President Obama, who also only raised it by about $500. So we had a level Pell at below $6,000 when the cost of attendance continues to go up. So these are all issues that higher education leaders have to deal with. The other issue, of course, is that as we've seen the European Union strengthen, and for the first time, U.S. schools are not in the top 2 of world-rated schools. So there are other schools that are in those top 2. And we've seen a decline, of course, again, because of the Orange Man. I'm being very civilized. Usually I call him the orange orangutan, but the orangutan lobby asked me not to do that anymore. But in any case, we've seen a decline in international enrollments by about 10%, because who wants to come here when you're running around calling people out of their names? So in any case, what I'm going to ask my panel to do is to introduce themselves and take a couple of minutes to talk about your institution in the context of these issues. I'm going to start with Dr. Ali because we're at his house. We are here at Roosevelt University. We're up in your house, and because we're in your house, we want to give you the props and have you begin the conversation.
Sure. Give me the hardest assignment to get us started. Well, thank you so much. We are all grappling with the same issues. The issue of preparation of students coming to college. It is a major, major issue for us. And you would say, well, you know, maybe I'm talking about the African American students, which is almost 20% of the population of Roosevelt University. Actually, I'm talking about all students coming in. The school system in the United States is not preparing our students, your sons and daughters and grandchildren and grandkids for college. We are falling behind, Dr. Malveaux, in every aspect from the rest of the world. I don't see how I can say this more emphatically. The students get here, they're unprepared. We absolutely do our best to keep them, raise their expectations, raise their self-confidence, and so forth. But that's hardly enough if the starting point is lower than what it should be. At the same time, how many of you think if you send your son, daughter, grandchildren to college, they will graduate in 4 years? Raise your hands. Okay. Here's the news. There is no 4-year graduation anymore. Okay? 6-year graduation, sometimes 8-year graduation. Honey, you're going to college, see you in 10 years or so. It's becoming norm. We are fighting against that every single day. Some of it is finances, yes, because that son or daughter can't afford to stay in college and work part-time somewhere. There is no way they can fund their education. Some of it is double major and triple major and so forth. So some of it is on the kids themselves. They get bad advice in terms of how to pursue it. But reality is most college students graduate in 4.5, 5, 6 years or longer. Okay? And that is a disaster because they are postponing what they need to do for their families. They're postponing their earnings, and they are accumulating debt. So I will tell you that what keeps me up at night is the issue of college debt for all college students, not just Roosevelt students, but for all college students. So let me stop there.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's important to mention that debt issue. Students owe over $1.2 trillion in debt. There's more student debt than there is credit card debt. I just met a lady, actually kind of blew my mind, who is in her 60s and she's still paying off student loans because she took out student loans to get her doctorate when she was in her 40s. She's still paying that debt off. So it's one of the things, 40% of all students, and this speaks to class, have no debt at all. They go through school, their parents pay for their education. So when you look at a number, they say the median debt for students is about $28,000. Well, if you factor in the fact that almost half have no debt, the median debt is something closer to $45,000. HBCU students have more debt than others do. So it's important to put that in context. I'm going to start with our brother at Kennedy King College at that end, and we'll go down.
My name is Greg Thomas. I'm the president of Kennedy King College. We are a comprehensive college, a community college on the south side of Chicago, serving the Englewood community in Bronzeville as well. I think you hit on a couple of points earlier. Some of the challenges that we're facing is low enrollment, or I should say declining enrollment. And that's a trend we're seeing throughout the United States among public institutions. I think what's unique about this is historically you've seen peaks and valleys with enrollment. I think what's really interesting now, and one of the challenges that we're seeing, this troubling trend of state funding decline as well. So we're reaching this historically low points in terms of enrollment decline across the United States, but we're also reaching historically lows in terms of state funding support as well. Now, why that is important, particularly for community colleges within the various cities throughout the United States, is that if you look at our demographics, we typically have what? A wide range of diversity among our population. We're typically students of color, typically first-generation students, typically, predominantly black or Latino populations, and again, low-income whites as well throughout the United States, particularly in the rural communities. So to see that we're seeing the first point of access as these institutions serve in the United States into higher education, as the funding starts to decline, it creates an issue of jeopardy in terms of access. So again, the community college serves as an access point for our society. It's a pivotal role in our society in terms of providing access for students that want to get into higher education and which their families have not historically had an opportunity to get into higher education. I kind of liken the community college to the HBCU. I'm a community college product, but I'm also an HBCU product. I went to Howard University as well. And again, both types of institutions serve as, again, providing access to non-traditional populations. So I think one thing we need to be mindful of is that we want to put pressure on our states to make sure that there's funding provided to public education, particularly to community colleges. If you look at the state of Illinois, for example, if you look at the return on investment, we have approximately 550,000 students that go to community colleges in the state, right? If you look at our 12 public institutions and universities, we have about 120,000 students collectively. If you look at the disparity in terms of the funding, there's millions and millions of dollars to separate between the two types of institutions. But if you look at the impact that they have in society in terms of the community college model, in terms of providing access, like I said, to non-traditional populations, it becomes a point of concern for us as citizens because, again, it opens the door in terms of fighting equity issues and social mobility issues as well.
Let's go to Dr. Sanders.
My name is Dave Sanders. I'm the president of Malcolm X College, and we certainly have a brand new facility here on the west side, a $251 million investment in the west side. I must say that we have bucked the trend. Malcolm X is leading the state of Illinois in enrollment growth by a whopping 1,126% over the state average. Our graduation rate has increased from 7% in 2015 when I arrived to 24% now, and we expect we'll end this year somewhere around 26 or 27%. And we are seeing, we have one of the best nursing programs in the state of Illinois by pass rate and volume, and the largest stable of health science programs in the state of Illinois and the most successful. Yet with all of that, we are seeing inequality with our students. You cannot damage a student, not address that damage, and expect that they're going to be on par with their colleagues. You have got to help them in order to allow them an opportunity to be successful. And one of the things that I've told my faculty is every child can learn. Every student can learn, and that must be our mindset. We cannot allow students to walk in and we stereotype them or believe because of where they've come from or the things they've gone through that they cannot be successful. They can be successful. And we need to ensure that we are always telling them that they need to keep going. I tell my students that you can't know what you don't know. So tutors are for smart people. They're not for dumb people. They're for smart people because you need to connect the dots. You're learning something you never learned before. So don't give up. Keep going and get the resources you need in order for you to be successful. And that is working. We're going to continue to do that, but it's these inequities and what we call bandwidth that students must recover. We opened a food pantry this year. In 2 days, we were out of food. It is the largest food pantry in city colleges, but in 2 days, we were out of food. We have expanded our wellness center where we have counseling services for students because we have seen an increase in volume 4 times over what we were seeing 2 years ago. And we are also seeing that students are having more instances of homelessness or insecure homes. So we must address all of those issues, and those are byproducts of these inequalities, of the fact that our students, the blacks and brown students, have not been given the quality education that they deserve.
Thank you. Dr. Evans.
Hi, my name is Andrea Evans. I am a professor and director of the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, which is a satellite campus for Northeastern Illinois University. I'll tell you a little bit about Northeastern first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Carruthers Center. Northeastern, of course, is a state university located on the north side in the Avondale community on the north side of Chicago. It is a Hispanic-serving institution, a minority-serving institution. It's about 38% Latino, 30% white, 10% African-American. It has a satellite campus, which some of you may know, which is the Carruthers Center, which is on 39th Street near Cottage Grove. Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies has been there and been a part of Northeastern for over 50 years, and part of its creation was to create an environment to educate African-American college students when the main campus wouldn't. So the legacy of the Carruthers Center is deep and wide and long, and that legacy continues. There's a predominantly African-American student population at the Carruthers Center. We're expanding our majors on that side of town to attract more African-American students and all students to our campus. I'll tell you a little bit about what I think the challenges are at Northeastern that came up this year, and primarily with African-American students. Retention is the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues at Northeastern Illinois University, and retention of African-American students especially, and after freshman year. And I know that's an issue nationwide, but we came about some data several months ago learning about our freshman African-American students and how many of them were at risk of not being able to return next year. So I'm on the Black Student Success Committee. We rallied together to pull all of the African-American students in a room, to tell them how to navigate the challenges they were facing, either the academic challenges or in some cases, or in many cases, they were financial challenges. Some of those students, we simply needed to say to them, you need to write an appeal letter to financial aid to get X, Y, and Z taken care of, right? So when someone raised the alarm and said we've got about 70% of our African-American freshmen at risk, those of us who cared about those students rallied together and brought those students in a room to try to provide the support and information that they needed to have a successful and complete their semester successfully, but then also to be able to come back in the fall. So that's one, I mean, in addition to the financial challenges that we all face, in addition to the enrollment challenges, we are really trying to keep students in school who actually get admitted. And that's been a real challenge, and it's a real challenge with African American students, one that we're really, and those of us who care about this population in particular, that we're working on intently and providing mentorship. I think that's the other thing too. When we brought these students together, we actually separated students out by major. So I'm a STEM major as an undergrad, and so I simply said, if you're a STEM major, I want to talk to you. I want to be the person that you can come to if you need support, help, tutoring, mentoring, so that they have someone on campus that they can identify with. What we've understood with some of our students is navigating the bureaucracy of the campus can be difficult for them, understanding where to go when they need help, asking for help. So instead of them coming to us, we went to them. We're putting ourselves in front of their faces saying, we're a bunch of mostly African-American folks on this Black Student Success Committee, although it's not all African-American, saying, we're here for you. We're going to put ourselves in front of your face so that you know who to contact when you need some assistance. So that's a challenge that we're facing at Northeastern.
Great. Dr. Scott?
Attorney Scott.
Pardon?
No, not a doctor. Attorney Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Z. Scott. I'm the president of Chicago State University. I've just entered my 11th month on campus. Most of the news I tell you that most of the news of Chicago State being closed is false. That all that news is false. We are indeed open. Most of you know that many of us who are involved in public higher education know that there was a 2-year period that the state's public institutions went without any appropriation from the state that led to significant financial stress on Chicago State. During that period of time, Chicago State lost about 2,000 students. And when we looked at where those students went, many of them went nowhere. They went back home. And most of you don't know that in the last 4 years, the number of African Americans going to college in Illinois has dropped about 10%. The alarm bell should go off, and there are many philanthropic organizations in this state that are worried about what is going on with African Americans and degree attainment. I mean, there's some remarkable stories going on at Chicago State. I mean, about 2 weeks ago, we graduated our 72 students from our College of Pharmacy with doctoral degrees in pharmacy. And that was, and we graduate more minority students in pharmacy than any other college in the Midwest. We are rated number, I think, 3 in the nation in terms of students graduating in physics. We have 100% employment in our pharmacy, nursing, occupational therapy, and education programs. We are what I tell our faculty a well-kept secret. So there are a lot of great things going on. Our enrollment numbers are going up. Our Vice President of Enrollment Management is here this afternoon. We're working hard to reclaim our city and to reclaim our students because every student who is able is entitled to, I believe, a college degree. One of the most significant things going on in the state of Illinois right now is the fight for funding. Our legislature in two weeks will make a decision about who and what priorities will be funded. The public university presidents in this state are jointly and collectively advocating for public education and for higher education. I have spent so much time in Springfield that I now have gotten to know the food places and the hotels, advocating for Chicago State in and out of the offices of our senators and state legislators, trying to prioritize higher education. Because A state without a strong system of public higher education is a state that is at risk. So I want each of you to think about who you know and who you can call, because those phone calls do make a difference. Chicago State has put together a media program for advocating for a budget, a strong budget for higher education. They are threatening not only to keep our budget flat, they are threatening to take money away from higher education. Chicago State is beginning to rise, transform, and renew, but we cannot do that without adequate and equitable funding. So it is not enough to give Chicago State what you give everybody else when the job you've been asked us to do is more difficult than the job that everyone else is doing. Students come to us with all kinds of issues and concerns that are not dictated by who they are, where they're, but mostly by their zip code. Inadequate education, inadequate support for mental and physical health, hunger, homelessness, trauma, all those things are being brought on our campus, and we have to manage them as well as manage the academic part of what has to happen on our campus. So what I'm asking each of you to do here is to take 1 second and send an email to your local rep and your local senator saying, support higher education.
Very good. And I think that's a powerful suggestion. We always talk about higher education, but we know that state funding nationally has gone down for public higher education. And public higher education tends to be the most affordable option for people of color especially. And I'm a little tired of the people of color designation. I just like to say black, 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 black. Just because. Oftentimes there are differences. And we do have to be clear that when we look at higher education enrollment, there are folks of color in higher education who are doing quite well. And then we see African Americans, frankly, increasingly marginalized. And so if y'all would actually just do that as your homework. Do the email to your legislator, or make a phone call, or maybe offer to accompany President Scott on one of her lobbying visits, because she needs all the help that she can get. I remember when Chicago State was so in the news for any number of deleterious reasons, and we don't like that. And I have confidence that you're going to turn it around and that you will increase your enrollment and do everything else that needs to be done. I think we've talked mostly, although you've talked about your doctoral students, but we've basically looked at the undergraduate experience. But I'm interested in the graduate experience as well. The number of African Americans in the professoriate has gone down significantly, and we're 2%. And the reason that it's down so is that fewer of us are getting doctorates, fewer of us are going into college teaching. But the process of getting a doctorate, as I said earlier, there's a fair amount of isolation. I think about Dr. Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander. She was the first black woman to get a PhD in economics, and she got it from the University of Pennsylvania. I had the opportunity to go through her diaries. She had one incident, and I want y'all to comment, but she had this one incident where she was looking for a classroom in the rain on the first day of class. She walked by a young white woman, and she said, "Do you know where the hall is?" And the woman did not even deign to speak to her. She just kept on rolling. So Dr. Alexander, then Sadie, eventually found the classroom. And in her diary, she writes, "Imagine my surprise at seeing the same woman I asked for directions sitting in the front row." She goes on to say, "I have nobody here but God." Nobody here but God. So let's talk about the graduate experience at your campuses, and what can we do to ensure that it's more possible for African American students to matriculate at the PhD level? We start at that end and we'll go down.
Well, Kennedy King College does not have graduate programs. However, we do provide the pipeline to the universities to allow themselves to go on and get a graduate degree and get specifically a graduate degree, a PhD or a master's degree. But we can play a role in terms of solidifying articulation agreements. I have those set in place with my two colleagues at the end, assuring that our students are passed over to good hands to allow for that pipeline to manifest.
Dr. Ali?
Yes, right now, starting with community colleges, we have now articulation agreements for all of our colleagues to go 2+4+ graduate school. And that's really the program we're working on diligently, exactly for the reasons that Dr. MALVEAUX mentioned, that our students are demanding more faculty of color, and we just have to produce it ourselves. We can't wait for somebody else to do it for us. And so we're working, for example, most recently with Rush Hospital on 2+4+ graduate school and so forth. And it is not easy, as you can imagine, but at the same time, most of you may know that many graduate and doctorate programs, the universities fund it. Okay, so the students really don't pay for it per se. They teach, do research with the faculty, and so forth. And that makes it very attractive, but you have to almost be full-time. And it's very hard to have a family, to have children, and so forth, and they'll go full-time to a university on a graduate student stipend and attempt to live that way in a city like Chicago. So.
Moving on.
Yeah, I will say, well, first of all, as you well know, academia is a very tough place. And, you know, professors are often taught to duplicate themselves.
Yes.
You know, so they're looking for the graduate student who looks like them, and those are the people that they're promoting, and those are the people that get the grad assistantships. Those are the people who get teaching assistantships. Northeastern doesn't have a doctorate program, but I will speak a little bit about my professional association. So my background, my PhD is in education policy. So I'm a part of what's called the American Educational Research Association, but also the University Council for Educational Administration. Both of those organizations, I've been very fortunate to align myself with a group of African American scholars, and part of our job is to identify those graduate students and support them. And those groups, we've done a variety of things. I mean, first of all, I've been supported by those groups in a variety of ways. But other things that we do, we identify these folks, we mentor up, we make sure that we have one-on-one relationships, and we publish with them. Because to break down the barrier, the publisher-perish thing, you need people to show you the way. So part of what I've been able to do was to publish articles with graduate students who then went on to get professorships later. And so that kind of work, for those of us who have been in this field in this manner, is really critical. Some of us see it as a duty to duplicate ourselves by bringing those students up, showing them the ropes. One of our organizations, we send emails around before the annual conference for our annual BFD, our Black Folks Dinner, so that we get together and talk about our strategy to meet and greet graduate students, mentor up, and assign them to people so that they can publish and be ready to apply for professor jobs. So again, it's not happening at Northeastern because we don't have a doc program, but as a part of my professional association, and I think it's a duty that we all feel very serious about.
Dr. Saunders, do you want to jump in this?
We don't offer doctoral degrees. That's my sister campus over there. So, but obviously we do have articulation agreements, and we do support our students moving forward.
Wonderful. President Scott?
Well, we do offer doctoral degrees in education. Are there any other? And pharmacy. The beauty of being on the campus of Chicago State, which is 70% African American among our student population, is I see minority doctoral professors and lecturers all day long. I mean, because that is the team that supports our students at Chicago State. So the majority of the faculty and staff there is minority. So when I was looking at ways to improve the outcomes for our students from application to career, I started looking around for student success strategies that had been put in place by other universities. And I looked at the strategy that was in the study that had been done by UIC. And UIC was looking at how they could improve outcomes for their African American students. The first thing they said, they needed to have minority faculty. We have that. The second thing they said, they had to build a culture that was more supportive of African American students. We have that. The University of Southern California released a study last year about public universities across the nation, and they graded them on their ability to advance equity in educating African American students. Chicago State was rated number one, the number one public university in Illinois in its equity in educating African American students, and it was rated number 2 nationally, along with 14 other public universities. So we got that. And the next thing is that they wanted there to be more a sense of culture and inclusion for their students on their campus. We have that. So those factors that other public universities worry about in their ability to educate African American students, many of those factors are already managed on our campus. Particularly, and I think you see that in the outcomes, the fact that we have solid outcomes in our doctoral degree program in education, and our success in our pharmacy program.
Well, the pharmacy program seems quite commendable, so thank you for that. Part of the higher education experience happens in the classroom, but much of it also happens outside the classroom. One of the class issues I think we have in the African American community is that our young people often cannot afford to participate in unpaid internships, don't necessarily have the opportunities to do study abroad, which is very important in our newly or more global world. Don't have many of the other opportunities. I had a student at Bennett. She actually beat out doctoral students to get an internship at the United Nations. It was just one of several programs. One program had 16 people in it, and she was a junior at Bennett. There was a PhD student at Harvard, so she had managed to stomp basically in that ground. But her mom did not want her to take advantage of the program because she said, your school says I have to come up with $3,000, in September and August, and she has to go earn the $3,000. I was able to pull some strings and do some things I wouldn't repeat on mic, but we were able to take care of her. We found an alum to help her stay in New York City because living in New York City is really expensive. But it was a real stretch to get that done. What do you do and what must we do to ensure that our African American students have the same kind of rich experience that so many other students have in terms of study abroad or internships or the Capitol Hill assignments or those kinds of things? What do your campuses do, or what can we do around those things? Let's start with Dr. Scott this time, Professor Scott.
So you have to work at it. I think that, I sign travel authorizations all day long, and I'm signing authorizations for our students to travel abroad to Africa, along with professors for internships this summer. We're sending students to the CERN Institute in Switzerland to study particle physics with a professor. So our students are getting those opportunities to travel abroad, and those are being emphasized by our team that's focused on international experience for our students. But every time I meet somebody in corporate America at a certain level, I am asking for three things: money, internships, and jobs. And they're trickling in. But when we know that when we're sending our students into these experiences, we just can't lob them in. We got to make sure that they're ready to go in, because the culture that they may encounter is different from any other culture that they have experienced before. Before I walked into the room today, I was talking to our career services about what are we doing to make sure that our students not only have the jobs, but they are prepared to go into that environment. I came from the legal profession to Chicago State as a law firm partner. I was 0.1% of all partners in large law firms, black females, 0.1%. I had no company, and I know what that feeling of isolation is like, and and the need for mentorship around those experiences. But one of our summer internship opportunities, they've accepted 3 Chicago State students. They're actually working with our students, not just on the work experience, but the professional experience of being a professional in a professional work environment. So those are the kind of things that we have to do. But one thing we know about our students who are coming on and off campus, many of them don't even appreciate the need for an internship opportunity. We can hand them the opportunity, but they don't understand the importance of that. So one of the things that we're going to do now is, as students transfer in or enter Chicago State, part of that transition to campus will be emphasizing internships.
Great.
I want to echo Dr. Scott's emphasis on partnerships with corporate. I was here this morning for the corporate breakfast, and those individuals talked about their desire to provide these internships and opportunities to college students. They talked about culture, about the importance of students understanding culture of the corporate environment, what that means in terms of dress and how you act and how you talk. And I think that the general public probably underestimates the significance of the university corporate partnership, how important that is, but also the fundraising piece. The Carruthers Center has typically taken students to Africa as a part of the African American Studies class. They've taken students to Brazil. But with our students, with African American students especially, we have to do big time fundraising to support all of those students to go on these trips. And so some of those, it's just, we're happy to do it. We're actually thinking about it and planning another trip to Africa next year. But the partnerships come into play here. Fundraising comes into play. Corporate partnerships come into play big time, I think, for all universities, and we're looking at ways of taking advantage of that and providing opportunities and internships for students at Northeastern and students at the Carruthers Center.
Dr. Saunders.
I would implore everyone to look at your community colleges again, and especially here in the city of Chicago, because we're not your ugly duckling that you may have thought of us before. We are actually one of the most successful systems that you'll ever find, and our outcomes show that. We started short-term programs in order to impact our students, and it is the fastest growing career pathways that we have here in the city of Chicago. You can go to school for 4 months for $1,752 and earn $31,000 at a minimum. And we need more people. You can clap on that because it's a good thing. We need more people going to those programs. We've expanded them. We have 6 right now. We're going to go to 8. We also are looking on our liberal arts side to connect students with jobs. So no matter what your pathway, if you're going down humanities or social services or social sciences, we want to make sure that there's a job that you can get to and there's a quick pathway. And that didn't just come about. We looked at research. What was stopping students from getting to the pathway they wanted? And we saw that socioeconomic factors were stopping students before they could get to where they wanted to go. So we needed to be quicker at getting them to a credential so that they could get to where they needed to go. And we needed to have an opportunity for them to come back, pick up where they left off, and keep going. But we didn't stop there. We have partnerships with more than 100 healthcare institutions where they help us not only to address the quality of our curriculum, but to give us internships, to give us jobs. That is what is absolutely essential and necessary, and we are doing that right now. And so there is a plethora of things. We're already looking at study abroad programs. That's not your typical community college. We're looking for everything that is going to give our students a competitive advantage. This is the new community college system in the city of Chicago. You need to look at us because we have some tremendous opportunities for you.
Very good. Okay. Strong advocate for community colleges, which do tend to be the pipeline for many to go to the 4-year degree or actually to increase their professional possibilities. 29
of my students went to Chicago State. So when everybody else was turning away, we turned to Chicago State. 29 of my students were going there. So, and that was the largest number going to a public university here in Chicago. Our goal is not to denigrate ourselves and denigrate the educational prowess of our sister colleges and universities. Our goal is to expand your knowledge and understanding of what we have to offer you and your ability to achieve your objective. That's what we all have to be about. And this is not one thing that just I can do or this panel can do. We all have to be about this. Telling students you can make it, you can get there. There's a program. I got $2 million in scholarships waiting for you right now. Come on, we're going to get you there. Don't let nothing stop you. We got a STAR scholarship that you can go there for 3 years. You can go to city colleges free of charge. All you got to do is have a 17 ACT score and declare a major. That's all you got, and a 3.0 GPA. That is not a high bar to surpass, and you can go to school for free. You don't have to pay a dime. Your books are free. Everything is free. You need to come over to us. The quality is great. The opportunity is there. Where you at? Come on. I want to see you. I want to see you.
Okay, so if anybody has any doubts in their mind, he has to spell them. Let's move on to Dr. Ali regarding the non-classroom opportunities, study abroad, internships, the other things that our black students are so often.
No way I'm going to follow this. Let's go to Kennedy King. Well, honestly, I want to come back. So please make me stand. I want to come back and actually support my colleagues all for state universities and community colleges. So please.
Well, you know, Dr. Ali, actually that's a really great idea because these both are community colleges. We want to give this brother an opportunity to offer an equally impassioned case.
Well, I work with him on a daily basis. I can't give him thanks. So I'm not going to try. But again, I think we've heard collectively that the internships are important. But beyond the internships, we want to see job placement. So we really big on that. I've talked before about the loss of state funding. This is a trend you see throughout the United States. There's a lot of research that suggests this is going to be the new fiscal norm, which means what? That we need to get used to this operational mode. In the state of Arizona, the funding for community colleges is down to 0%. And again, I'm not just advocating for community colleges. I'm advocating for public and private higher education, period. But again, when we talk about the public good, this is typically the platform or vehicle for students of color, African-American students, Latino students, et cetera. So going back to the internships, how many of you heard of audible cars that drive themselves? Well, Kennedy King College just signed a deal with a tech company that's going to place a data container. It's going to be the first of its kind in Inglewood. Now, what we're doing with that process, we're going to create a new program that's going to allow for the mining of data containers. Now, most of the companies that are surrounding us right now in downtown Chicago, Fortune 500 companies, they take their data and place it off their facilities for high security purposes. That's a growing trend that's going to be with us for decades to come. Inglewood, Kennedy King College is going to be among the first to have that kind of operation. Now get this, talking about losing state funding, this company is going to pay the tuition of our students, again, free of charge. Okay? So we're going to have to find a way as educators to think out of the box and become more, what? Entrepreneurial. Okay? So we can't rely on the state. We want to advocate and push for the state to do their part. But if we're going to wait for the state, we're going to be in big trouble. But more importantly, we're going to not serve our communities and not serve our students. So we cannot afford to do that. Now, beyond just creating the opportunity for enrollment growth, we're generating revenue because they're going to pay us supplement in terms of the partnerships. Okay? So it's additional revenue that's coming into the institution. Okay? But more importantly also, we're going to create jobs for our students and also for the community of Inglewood as well. So this is a partnership. You can clap on that one. Thank you. Well, maybe I can compete a little bit with my colleague over here. We also have a partnership with a cybersecurity company as well. We formed a partnership with Apple as well. And get this, you heard of Amazon? You know, Amazon is a leading company when it comes to cloud. But when you think about cloud security, there's very few companies that are really taking the lead on that. So we just inked another deal to create a cloud-based security as well. Again, this particular company is going to pay the tuition and fees of our students. Why? Because it's such a high demand need. So I think part of the enrollment-driven process for us is going to be, it's not to just look at the traditional programs we've had, but what are the high demand profiles that the workforce is telling us? If you recall, during the Great Recession, President Obama, he partnered with two to kind of get the American economy rebooted, the community colleges. He brought in Ernie Duncan, but behind Ernie Duncan, who led the Department of Ed, he brought in Martha Cantor from California. She was a community college chancellor out there, and she was the one that was working with President Obama to reboot the economy. President Trump today talks about apprenticeships. He's also working with the community college structure. But again, one of the advantages is that we have the capacity to respond quickly to workforce needs. We also have at Kennedy King College the Dawson Institute. Have you ever heard of that? Some of you? Okay. We have a partnership with ComEd. And we have one of the highest placement rate with females that are coming through our pipeline that are going into those positions that have traditionally been held by men. Also, the overlying we have electrical company partnerships as well, laying the wiring systems throughout the city. Those jobs are paying over $100,000. And as my colleague pointed out, again, you're not looking at years and years of college and years of debt. So I think what we're finding is that we have the capacity to offer a variety of educational opportunities for our students, both at the university level, but at the community college level, that can lead to quick turnaround job opportunities and placement opportunities that will allow for people to go on and make a good source of living. And the key is to provide internships, but more important beyond internships is an actual job that pays well and take care of their families.
Great. Okay, Dr. Ali, you dodged that bullet.
Well, first of all, at Roosevelt University, we're doing exactly the same thing that our colleagues are doing. Lots and lots more internships, study abroad programs, and so forth, funded by scholarships. But I am personally allergic to anybody who offers us unpaid internships. Yes. Okay, and I just say, ooh, I'm sorry. What did you say? Unpaid, offer fewer internships, but pay the students something. Yes. So that they learn the value of that as well as the other learning that goes on. I want to come back to this issue of there's nothing like this system of higher education that we have in the United States elsewhere in the world. Okay? There's no community colleges anywhere else in the world where you can walk off the street, literally off the street, and go to the next community college and say, hi, I'm here, what classes do you have available? And within 20 minutes, 15 minutes, you could be in a class with your textbooks and so forth. Okay? There is nothing like it anywhere else in the world. That's why if we open our immigration system, every 17, 18-year-old around the world would want to come to the United States to study. I'm the best example of that, so I start here. Okay? I came here for the education system and the opportunity. And I couldn't go back, so here I am. You're stuck with me. I'm sorry about that. Okay? But what you see here, the state system, I just have one quiz for you. Can you guess what is the state funding, the amount of state funding from the total budget of any state university? Let's say University of Florida, University of Wisconsin, and so forth. The percentage of their budget that is state funded. Remember, I said State University of Florida, Michigan, so forth. Can you guess? How much? 30%? That was about 20 years ago.
Ooh.
Okay. How about it's in single digits right now? Okay. So you go to University of Michigan, 7 or 8% of the budget comes from the state of Michigan. The rest comes from fundraising, from the alumni support, and all the other things that a university does. Okay? That is the state of higher education right now in the United States. Any neighbor that tells you otherwise, start quizzing them. Start quizzing them. So yes, the state built you $246 million, did you say? $251 million facilities.
They didn't build it, though.
Okay. They didn't build it, but the bonds were there. However, in 2 days, the food pantry ran out of money.
That's right.
Okay, so think about that. This system is broken, and we will have nothing left if this system continues. Yes, state universities were 50% state funded. That was the whole point. Then the families could afford to pay the rest, and the students worked a little bit and paid. Right now, it is a joke. A textbook in any university could be $800, $400, $500. So what some of you or me used to pay for the entire tuition is now one textbook. We are breaking our system down. So that I want to actually advocate for our higher ed and public higher ed, because that also elevates us in a private university as well.
Can I comment just on that really quickly? Because it goes back to something that Ms. Hannah Jones mentioned about the values of education as a public or a private good. When it's no longer a public good, that's when you see the shift away from state funding, saying all of you individuals that are getting that education, you all pay for it, as opposed to, as a state, we see education as a public good because we have an educated populace, we have employed people who pay taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the values that an educated population can bring to a state. So that shift has taken place in in states across the country. So I just wanted to connect that to a value system, because that's where we are, that this value doesn't exist anymore, or it's in decline, that education is a public good versus a private one.
Well, as our nation's population has diversified, the things that we thought everyone should have access to, we begin to think that less clearly. Mm-hmm. So when you look at someone in the morning panel talked about the denigration of the teaching profession. The way that people start talking about teachers, disparaging teachers, is everything is the teacher's fault. When the young person comes to school, they haven't eaten, that's not the teacher's fault. Increasingly, teachers are finding themselves buried in paperwork that is about nothing but paperwork. There's a young lady, 26 years old in South Carolina, Pat, who actually quit her teaching job mid-year, which was trifling. But she said that it was trifling. But she said that she just couldn't take it anymore, just the burden of the paperwork. She was newly married, and she's the fact that she would get up in the morning at 6 o'clock and she'd still be doing stuff at 8 p.m. and didn't have time to spend with her new husband, whatever. But she quit her job. I get her. I think she was trifling. She should have finished the academic year. But at the same time, it just seems that the burden for teachers has become so heavy, and teachers are so disparaged. But the other piece of it really is the fact that there is an anti-intellectualism in our country that did not start with the Orange Man. I mean, we have seen, I remember maybe about 10 years ago doing a debate with some fool, and the man told me everybody didn't have to go to college. And I said, well, where do your children go to school? Well, his daughter went to Stanford and his son went to Harvard. I said, so drop them out and make some room for some black folks. If you, I mean, I had got wholly exacerbated with the man who said, everybody does. You know who's running that rap is somebody who is basically anti-access for diverse folk in higher education. So the anti-intellectualism also leads to the notion by rural state legislators often that you don't need to fund higher education. And that anti-intellectualism also shows up on campuses somehow in the declining level of comfortable campus climate. Now, there's a piece of data that I just recently saw. I don't know how widespread it is, but it said that African-American students who are in the top decile of their classes, increasing numbers of them are going to HBCUs, citing hostile environment as a reason that they do not want to go to PWIs. Let's talk a bit about environment on campus. Do students feel equally valued? Do they feel that their voices are valued? At Yale University recently we had some woman who believed it was okay to dress up in blackface, and they ran her off campus. And her husband wrote an article in the New York Times on how uncivil it was to run them off campus. Not really. But in any case, talk a bit about campus climate and how campuses are adapting to diverse populations on campus. Let's start with you.
But first of all, I think that there has to be an adaptation, and you also have to your statement about the kind of rhetoric that is out there about higher education. Look at the Tribune editorial board that is writing about not funding higher education. I mean look at the population that's reading the Tribune, Chicago Tribune, and hearing that they are just trying to discourage our governor from being a supporter of higher education. But back to a climate. Education has to constantly evolve to address the needs of the students who are coming through the door. Our latest conversation is making sure that that we have restrooms available on our campus that are available for transgender students or students who are making choices about their sexuality. So I tasked our facilities director to do an inventory of our bathrooms and determine which bathrooms would be accessible to that student population. We can't be static. That has always been the role of education, to lead, not follow. So that means that we have to lead in terms of what's coming through the door. I talked to our colleagues in high school colleagues and principals, and they talk about what they have to do now in order to make sure a student graduates. We've had meetings where we're talking about it's not just here's your book, here's your assignment, and we then expect you to graduate in 4. It is helping students. It's a lot of what used to look like parenting, making sure students complete the college applications, making sure that once they've completed the applications, they've been accepted, that they then are on their way. Because there's a whole department within CPS that just tries to prevent college melt. Students that have been accepted into college who are supposed to be on their way, making sure they get there. So it is now, at this point, more, I wouldn't call it burden, it's what's required right now to make sure that students are successful. And I think we just have to embrace it. We have to feed people. We have to sometimes clothe people. We have to make sure that they're mentally healthy. We have to understand what it looks like when they aren't mentally healthy. And that's where we are as a nation right now, and that's what we need to do to make sure our students are successful.
Dr. Evans?
I'll just say really quickly at Northeastern, again, just recently, we had a black student group call a meeting with all of the faculty, staff, and administrators at Northeastern. So this took place, I think, in April. And part of the reason for the discussion was to share in an open forum about their experiences on campus. And it was an eye-opening experience. I mean, these students shared interactions with particular professors, messages that they're getting about themselves as students, about whether they're, welcoming or unwelcoming messages, whether they belong or not. And so this is one of the things I really love about Northeastern is that we provide that kind of open space for students, but the next step is now what do we do about it? The other thing I mentioned too is that not everybody who needed to hear the message was at that meeting. So how do we communicate? Because, you're preaching to the choir. The choir shows up to hear about these things, not the people who are actually perhaps perpetrating some of these things upon African-American students. So we're actually about to do a climate study at Northeastern, not as a result of that, but because of things that had happened before. So I do think it's an issue on our campus of providing a welcoming space in a place that's diverse as Northeastern, because it is. It's a very diverse space, but welcoming in the classroom, feeling valued, feeling that they have an opportunity and a chance to succeed at high levels. Students don't always get that message from their professors, and so that's something that needs to be addressed and is being addressed at Northeastern.
Dr. Sanders.
So assessment and evaluation is the bedrock of any successful academic institution. It means you have to go back and look at what you're doing and determine whether or not it remains relevant to what you want to achieve. And that was the first thing that we had to do when we were looking at our programs. So a lot of people say to me, you got the shiny new building and that's the reason why people come there. It's not the reason people come there. It's the programs. The programs are getting to them where they need to go. And a part of that process was us listening to the students and understanding what they needed and implementing the supports that were necessary for them to be successful. We have to include them in the conversation. But let me tell you who else needs to be in the conversation. We need the parents in the conversation. My mama said if you come home with them grades, she was going to kick my tail. I believed her because I saw her do it before, so I believe she was going to do it again. We need someone to set the expectation on what's going to be done. What are you going to do? You are going to be successful. My mama didn't say, no, that was all right, baby. Come in with that D. I'm all right with you. No, that was not acceptable. She knew there was something in me that could come out. You birthed that child, you know it's something in that child. You need to tell that child, you gonna be successful. We won't accept nothing less than that, and then focus on the academic institution to do what they're supposed to do. That's what needs to happen.
Thank you. No, Dr. This time you have to go. You can't dunk every time. You don't get homestead privilege this time.
the whole legacy of the university, Roosevelt University, has been that we are a safe place for students of color, for diverse students, for GLBTQ students, and so forth. I also want to introduce you to Jamar Orr, our Dean of Students and Vice Provost for Diversity. If you stand up, Jamar. Okay. Jamar's job is actually to be in the hallways because, as you know, most of the learning, while it happens in the classroom, also happens in the hallways as well. And making sure we're doing the right things, we have the right programs for all of our students. I will give you one anecdote that I think might explain what we do here. I was in a gym in my apartment with this gentleman who was really angry at Roosevelt University, and I have no idea why. He says, I heard that you guys have women's studies. Why don't you have men's studies for a change? Okay?
Everything is men's studies.
Yeah.
White studies, too.
And I said, actually, because of you, we should have men's studies, but I didn't say that. And I said, what is it that is bothering you? And this was right before the 2018 elections. And he was angry. He was just angry about what he had heard, the various programs that we have for diversity and inclusion. I had spent some time on our website. And I said, first of all, I don't understand you being angry. You have the White House, you have the House, and you have the Senate. Why are you still angry? Okay? So that calmed him down just a little bit. Then I said, why don't you one of these days come with me? We go to our women's studies program. When we have a circle once a week, and our students come in and sit down and just talk about their stories. And see how many of them were pinched that day on the L coming in, how many were groped in the street right around the corner, how many were mocked that same day, so forth and so on. Besides that, they are making good grades, they are in the classroom, they support each other, they don't denigrate their next person sitting next to them, whether that person is a Muslim or a Hindu or what have you. And he hasn't taken me up on that offer. But what I'm saying to you, what we try to do with all of our student leaders and student organizations and the faculty as well, is to make it as safe as possible inside our buildings. We really can't control what happens outside, but inside the building, have an environment where students can speak up and be able to talk about inequality, talk about anything that bothers them. We do have incidences of racism, of sexism, all kinds of isms, but that's part of the learning in a university. And we ask them for a moment that they can learn from each other and go from there. I wish I had a magic answer to that, but it's part of them growing up as well. So let me stop.
Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Thomas.
I would say it's important to look at assessment. Our students also can give us insight and give us things that we may be missing in terms of ways to enhance the college experience for them. So we're going through a process now of looking at that feedback from our students, and we're looking to make the consequential switches and improvements for our institution. The other thing is important to look at the institutional data. So if you're looking at retention, for example, the data will reveal, the numbers don't lie, which students are having more challenges than others. What we found at our institutions is that our males of color, particularly African-American males, have the highest attrition rate, the highest dropout rate. So based upon that information, we have a responsibility to respond accordingly. Again, looking at that population specifically and drilling down a little bit further and finding what those issues were, we discovered that our students, our African-American males, were having a difficult time integrating into the institution. So in response to that, we looked at best practices and we created a mentor program for our males of color, and we allowed for a better transition to the institution. What we also found is that created a peer reality in terms of a cohort reality, which allowed for them to be supportive of one another as well. So again, there's a lot of things that we can do to make improvements that are defined and also represent best practice. With that particular illustration, what we found is that our males of color that went through that particular initiative have a higher success rate, higher retention rate. That's one illustration. If you're looking at the first-year experience throughout the United States, regardless if it's public, private, or 2-year or 4-year, what you find is the students are most likely to drop within that first year of college. So again, as a result of that, what are we going to do to respond to that? Do we strengthen our orientation for that first year? Do we create a first year experience for those students? So again, there's definitive things that we can do in response to the data.
I want to thank this panel. Give them a round of applause, please. I think we learned a lot not only about their respective institutions, but also about their individual and focused forms of leadership. And what we know in higher education, Brown versus Board of Education, of course, said that separate but equal was illegal. We know in higher education, just like in K through 12, there are still glaring inequalities. First of all, the national mood of anti-intellectualism has been an active discourager of some young people to come to college. You hear people say, well, you're not going to make that much money. Well, guess what? You'll make more than you would have if you did go. It's not going to be equal. The Economic Policy Institute has just done some research about the class of 2019, finding that with job offers and wages, black students are going to earn about 15 to 20% less than their white counterparts, even now. That's just how it is. Does that mean they don't go to college? No. It means they go and they use the tools that they have to fight the segregation, to fight the discrimination, and to fight the unfairness. And so what we have here is a panel of higher education leaders who are doing that. I don't think that anybody can match the passion of Dr. Sanders here. And that's because most educators, especially in higher ed, do the work because they feel the passion for the work. Because many of us, I say us, I'm not an educator anymore, but then again, I think I always am. But, we cross a bridge, we walked across somebody's back, and we're eager to have someone walk across ours. And so I want to thank them for their work. I want to remind you that Dr. Scott has asked for your support for Chicago State.
That's right.
It's a very small thing to do, 10 minutes, to send an email to your legislator and say, please properly fund Chicago State. See, my theory is that, not my theory, but they need to make up for the years that the monies have been withheld. Because that really...
And fund all of higher ed. Yes. We certainly want Chicago State. But can I ask one more thing, Dr. Malveaux? Please. I need everybody in this room to promise me one thing. That you will vote. Your voice must be heard at the voting box.
Oh, yeah.
Less than 30% of African Americans voted in the last election. So when they don't listen to us, it's because they're saying they're not worried about that 20% that voted. We must let our voices be heard. The next time, which is in 2020, everybody must vote.
Thank you so much. Well, you don't come to a rainbow event if you don't vote. Reverend Jackson will get you himself if you don't vote. So I'm going to ask a panel to come down, and I'm going to ask, you want them to stay up there? Oh, that's... Dr. Attorney Ralph Martire is going to close the day for us with public policy recommendations. This is his house too. He's a professor here, the Arthur Rugloff Professor of Public Policy. And so, Attorney Martire, the microphone is yours.
Oh, really? I get the big thing? Thank you.
No, actually, give him the little mic.
Well, good afternoon. So it's all that stands between you and getting your Friday evening drink on is me, right? That's what's going on here. So, I'll try to bring this in from a policy standpoint of what it really means. And in Illinois, for a change, I actually have some good news. But before I put the good news out there, I want to talk about the state of what is. So the state of what is, you've just heard them talk about underfunding of higher education in this state. In the year 2000, the state of Illinois spent $2.1 billion supporting public institutions of higher learning in our state, in the year 2000. This year, 2019, they're going to spend $400 million less than in the year 2000. 20 years ago. After inflation, that's a 52% cut in funding to higher ed. So what does that mean? Overall, higher ed costs, way back in the year 2000, about 70% of them were covered by the state, community college and up, at public institutions of higher learning. Now it's below 20. Tuitions for our public institutions of higher learning in Illinois have risen at a rate 50% faster than the national average. If you disinvest in higher education or any other program, there are consequences. And those consequences tend not to be borne equally. So we talked about college debt. Someone mentioned it's $1.2 trillion. 23% of white families in Illinois are burdened with college debt. 48% of black families are. 48%. That's an incredibly meaningful differential. And when you look at the economic data, so you don't send your kid to college so that they could become the most brilliant whatever. Maybe you do. Maybe you're altruistic. Since 1980, the only group of workers in all of America that have seen their incomes increase by a rate greater than inflation have a college degree. Since 1980. Every other class of worker has seen their income drop below where it was in 1980. So having a college degree might not guarantee that you get the job you want, but if you don't have a college degree, you are almost guaranteed not to, right? So the truth is, it's more important than ever to go on and credential yourself at the next level. So how do we get kids there? Early childhood and K-12, right? Here's what the K-12 system has been proven it does poorly. Make up for gaps in learning that children show up with in kindergarten and first grade. So your starting point has to be adequately funding early childhood education. Because if you don't do that, even good schools aren't really good at closing the gaps kids show up with. So number one, that major investment has to be made on the front end. Now then there's K-12 education. Illinois, until August 31st of 2017, had the single most inequitable and inadequate school funding formula in America. We had the worst. I served on a bunch of national commissions and this and that, and every time I had to admit I was from Illinois, it was, oh, yeah, Illinois. Of course, when someone from Kansas did that, I said, well, at least we have evolution. So, because Kansas, they do teach creationism there. It's kind of a crazy thing. But we changed. And this is the hope for the future, but it's also a rallying point for work to do. On August 31st of 2017, against his will, Governor Rauner signed the evidence-based funding formula into law. It completely changed how we fund education at the K-12 level in Illinois. It now ties the amount of money a specific school district gets to the cost of funding those educational practices which the research shows actually enhances student achievement for all kids. It funds what works. Not one stupid foundation number of funding per kid for every kid in a state as diverse as Illinois, where we have a student population K-12 of over 2 million. Every school district gets a unique target of resources it needs based on the student population it serves. You have more low-income kids than the neighboring school district, you're going to get more money. More special needs kids, more money. More English language learners, more money. The first time they funded this bill was last year, 2018. They put $366 million more into K-12 education than they did the prior year. So what changed? 79% of that money, 289 million of the 366, went to the school districts that educate 83% of our black kids and 79% of our Latino kids. We have never had a school funding formula that dictates resources go to underserved communities like that. Never before. It works. 90% of the money went to school districts that were over 50% low income. The money is going where it's needed. Here's the problem. The Illinois State Board of Education has indicated we are currently $7.3 billion short of what the evidence indicates is needed for every one of our K-12 schools to have the resources necessary to put in place these evidence-based practices that actually enhance student achievement. $7.3 billion. To give you context, all funding from the state of Illinois into K-12 this year will be about $7.8 billion. We have to double what we are putting in from the state level. This is something to advocate for. Fully fund early childhood so kids don't show up with gaps in learning and skills when they get to kindergarten or first grade. Fully fund the evidence-based formula so that every school district in Illinois has the resources it needs to educate the children it serves. And then when those kids go on and graduate and do better, guess what? Your jobs were just made easier. You don't have to overcome those learning gaps, those skill gaps. You don't have to devote resources to teaching kids what they should have learned in 8th grade. You know, I am so honored to be a professor at this university. I am now a full-time faculty member here, but for years I was an adjunct. And I was drawn to this university for a couple of reasons. You know, it has this mission of social and economic justice, but it doesn't lip serve that mission. I mean, our faculty, our staff, our administration are truly committed to it. You look at our diverse student body, we are a majority-minority institution. And at the grad level, at least the students I get, Dr. I don't know what other people's experiences, but the students I get are at least 70 to 80% minority coming through to get their masters to move on to that next level in the career. These are hardworking, smart students with adult experiences. I have to help overcome what they didn't learn in 7th and 8th grade. It is ridiculous. So, policy changes. We had a major one in Illinois. This evidence-based funding formula passage was unique. We now have to push our legislature to fund it. So when you hear all this noise about, you know, tax policy, should we raise the income tax, blah, 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 blah. Yes. Yes, we need resources to fund these things. Yes. No, it doesn't hurt the economy. The people paying to get us, you, to fight against these tax increases are the really rich folks who pay a very low percentage of their income in taxes and in exchange have their kids go to the best public schools in America and then go to the best universities in America. They could pay a little bit more in taxes to help fund a better pre-K through higher ed system. We need more money at the federal level, not just for Pell Grants, but I think to ensure every student has the opportunity to go on to either community college and get a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree that wants to, irrespective of their income, period. It should be guaranteed. And if their income is below a certain level, we should pay for it from the federal government level. We just should. We're the richest nation in the world by a multiple of the next richest nation. But that wealth isn't exactly distributed across the country. So right now in America, and this is census data, so if you were inclined to do it, you could go do this yourself. This is fun. The wealthiest 10% in our country own 77% of America's wealth. 77%. The wealthiest 3% in our country own over half of all the wealth in America. We have such a disproportionate share of economic benefit over time, that we have to resolve that, make up for that, by focusing more taxes at the top, taking that money in and investing in the bottom and middle. Now, will some tax changes require you to probably pay more in taxes? Let me think about it. Yes. Yes. That's the way the world works. But I'm telling you, you can't let paying a little bit more in taxes every year stand in the way of really making these important institutions like public education be adequately funded for everyone. Because if we don't do it, if we don't put the funding in on the front end, the outcomes we will get on the back end are just not going to be acceptable. Now, we heard a lot about race today, and am I the only white guy up here on this panel? Here's your diversity, apparently. But it's an interesting thing when you look at race and education. So I serve on a statewide commission called the Professional Review Panel, and we're monitoring the implementation of this new school funding formula. So we get to make the state board run data on anything we want. So we said, you know what, everyone always says that African American students aren't succeeding just because there's a disproportionate number of them that are low income. It's a low income thing. It's not an African American, it's not a race thing. Okay, certainly there's a major gap in student performance by income, whether you're looking at graduation rates or test scores or whatever. Yeah. But there also are about race, right? So we had a big enough data set, we said control for income. Control. Tell us if there's also a significant gap by race that's not explained by income. Yes, larger than the income gap. So what does that mean? It means our system is not welcoming to and accepting of a specific race of children, African American kids. That's the data. It's a system flaw. And it's not the kind of system flaw our education policy is used to fixing. Why is that? The things we're used to, sort of at-risk students, what are they? They are low-income kids. So if you're low income, you're at risk of academic failure because you don't have education typically reinforced at home as much as a middle or upper income kid does. Less access to books and computers and technology, less parent involvement, all that stuff. This is the long-term data, exceptions to all the rules. But the system knows that, and so they could make up for what you lack in your home environment in education reinforcement with supports. We understand it. English language learner, well, there's one we understand, right? A kid is learning English while they are learning in English. We get what the problem is, and so we have interventions to work with that kid to overcome problems that kid faces. Race? There is no inherent problem with a black kid that says the black kid can't learn at the same level as the white kid. This isn't an inherent problem with the kid. This is a problem with the system. And the system is what needs the intervention in this case. Right? Education is not used to that. But it's solvable. It's doable. You analyze the system, you fix it. So you want policy reforms? We're doing this, by the way. So I live in River Forest, Illinois. We're I think we have a zoning ordinance against poverty. I mean, there are no low-income kids where I live. It's just the truth. It's being honest. But, you know, it's interesting. My school district, which is a very high-performing school district, was 96% white in the year 2000 and is now only 72% white. We've tremendously diversified. Now, we have all the assets and resources we need to provide a world-class education to any kid that walks in our doors. But we are seeing a gap in achievement between our white and our black kids. It's not acceptable. So we went forth. First off, we told our community, you want an excellent education system? It means an education system that works for all our children, not just our white kids. So we are going to invest in ensuring our system gets reformed, our internal problems, so that our black kids are achieving at the same levels as our white kids. Or to flip it, the race of a student in our district ought not be a predictor of any academic outcome. A kid should succeed or fail based on that kid's effort, period, end of story, black, white, green, doesn't matter. That's how it should work. That's how it should work. So we said, okay, what can you do to fix that from a policy standpoint? And we put in place a couple of reforms. Number one, hiring practices. We determined that we had a pretty white faculty and staff. In fact, any student entering a school in River Forest, we're only a K through 8 system, kindergarten, that stayed all through 8th grade, had a 96% chance of never having a minority teacher. Ever. All the research, all of it, shows all children perform better with a diverse faculty. White kids too. Because a diverse faculty thinks and challenges students in different ways, has different cultural competencies, promotes critical thinking and problem solving. When the corporations that fund us come to you, do they care about the specific skills they're learning at the university, or do they want them to be problem solvers and critical thinkers? What do they want? Yes, this is promoted with a diverse faculty. So we changed our hiring practices, and that was 3 years ago, and since then, over 30% of our new hires have been diverse. Good job. Moving down the right path. Number two, instruction, pedagogy, whatever you want to call it. There's a couple of things there that clearly are problematic when your system is failing a defined subgroup of children, and that definition is their race. Number one, you are not culturally relevant to those kids. You gotta ensure that whatever you're doing from an instructional or pedagogical approach is culturally relevant. We have a solution for that. But second, what we determined, and we do a lot of surveying of our student population, what we determined was our African American kids felt alienated at the school. You talked about culture climate, right? As your panel talked about that a lot. So we said, well, what can we really do to address that from an instruction standpoint? So we went to something called the Universal Design for Learning, the UDL. And in fact, it's great, and it moves a little bit away from the sage on the stage. So the teacher helps facilitate the kids solving problems together as a group, whether it's in science, math, or whatever. And the kids get a little more say in how they express their mastery of the content that you're evaluating. I don't want to write a poem. I want to do a video. Okay, go do the video. As long as you show mastery of the content, you've done it, kid. What this does to children that have been historically alienated, it says you suddenly matter. You matter to your teacher, and you matter to your colleagues, your peers. Your opinion matters. How you want to express yourself matters. You matter. And suddenly those achievement gaps start going away because a kid feels welcomed, part of the system, and valued. So we are forcing all of our faculty to change how they teach. A lot of professional development here. Third, and let's not play around with this, okay, bias is a problem. Right? Bias is a problem. But it's not just the, easy to spot racist attitudes where you could see some implicit bias. Everybody's got implicit biases. There ain't a person on this earth that doesn't have implicit biases. I have implicit biases. Ain't proud of them, got them. Found out about it through professional development. So what we did was we used the National Equity Project, by the way. There's a number of providers, but they're an evidence research-based provider of professional development on addressing issues like bias. and specifically implicit bias. And we've engaged them to do 4 trainings a year for our faculty and administration, and 2 a year for the school board at public meetings. I'll tell you how fun that is, where you're exposing what an idiot you are in public through this dialogue with your professional provider. Now, I want to tell you, our faculty fought this at first at the school level. I'm having biases. Love all my kids. Most teachers get into teaching because they love kids. But they're mostly white women. From Iowa, I think, disproportionately. They have biases, you know? So after the first professional development, we surveyed our faculty on implicit bias, and, you know, they were mixed feelings. You know, we don't need this. I know what I'm doing, but I'm not biased. By the third, because we're committed, we're doing this, we're changing this pattern at our schools. By the third, over 95% of our faculty was like, oh my God, I had no idea I was doing that stuff. Could I please get practice tips to be better at teaching? And so this is, I think, the policy approaches we need to take to address these problems. They are structural and they're built into our system. And they've been going on forever. And so from a policy standpoint, I am someone that works on public policy. I think all these problems are solvable if we take this approach of first identifying what the real cause of the problem is, and then finding those best practices, those evidence-based practices that are out there to address them and eliminate them. So now in Illinois, we've got a number of challenges still going on. You've heard me rattle on about policy changes. What else should we be doing, or what could we be doing better to move a policy agenda forward so that the systems change, and 10 years from now we could have a convening here where we talk about all the progress we've made. Just go down the panel.
Well, again, I think it gets back to funding. I saw that article about the SAT really considering how certain factors affect the test scores. But I think when a funding formula, an equitable funding formula is put in place for higher education, that you will fund those institutions like Chicago State who are, dealing with large minority populations. For students who are coming to us as a result of all the system errors that you just pointed out, bias and that and how it impacts education, not as a result of the zip code, but just as a result of inadequate teaching materials that don't address, that are not culturally competent, educators who have approached our students in a way that has harmed them psychologically, in a way that has robbed them of their confidence. I mean, we're dealing with that too, in addition to the other stress on the systems. So I think that, I look at, U of I, and I'm just using U of I as an example, they're capturing students with a 32 ACT score, and a 4.0 GPA or something like that. When a student goes there, they're just facilitating education. Here are your options, we'll see you in 4 years. But if I'm taking a student with a 17 on the ACT with a 2.2 GPA, and I'm trying to get them across that finish line, knowing that that's going to make the difference in terms of who they can be as an income earner and taxpayer, I need more money for that.
Yep.
And I ought to get more money for that. That's equitable funding.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the K-12 piece. So I am working with the Illinois State Board of Ed on there's a committee called the Diverse and Learner Ready Teachers Committee, and the purpose of that committee is to have more diverse teachers in Illinois, which is a problem, we all know, and also to create more culturally responsive teachers. The one thing that I would say policy-wise that I'm concerned about as a part of that committee, and I'm actually working on a white paper right now with them having to do with the lack of diversity in Illinois teachers. But one thing that's of concern, we've talked earlier today about the testing. So there are certain keep-out policies for students of color going into the teaching profession, and then push out policies, because the retention of black teachers in Illinois is horrible because they're put in really difficult circumstances and not supported. So policy-wise, that's one that I'm very, very concerned about, that we have policies in place that support teachers of color. Hiring is a big deal, because I know for a fact I've been a part of school districts where somebody with a black name, Shaniqua, who had a South Side address, was pulled out of the pool simply because of the name and where their address. So that happens in Illinois, folks. You might not know it, but that happens. So when we talk about there's no black teachers, some of them are applying, they're not being hired. So that's one of the policy issues that I'm most concerned about.
Great. I want to thank Ralph for opening up the panel the opportunity to talk about public policy, but I'm also going to ask the panel to respond briefly, if you don't mind.
Of course. Listening to Ms. Hannah Jones regarding the disparity for a specific student bright students attempting to go to college, and how short she came because of the lack of funding in the system. What I've been advocating, and hopefully with Ralph and others, everybody in the room, we need a state fund for all college students in Illinois. Okay? So every citizen that is born knows there's a fund. Nobody else can touch it except for college funding. And irrespective of your zip code, of color of the skin, and so forth. That allows you to go to Illinois for college, starting with community college and any type of university you choose.
I guess in terms of pushing policy, I would say it's imperative that we communicate to the public. We talked earlier about the loss of state funding. I don't think most of us are aware of the fact that this is a national trend. This is not just about the budget and money. We're talking about structured inequity. And everything we talked about today, this is kind of fostering that paradigm to continue. So when you look at who's going to the public institutions, it's typically people that look like us at the community college level and the university level. And as we know, education is the pipeline that goes to, again, social equity and social mobility. So this is a structural issue that we need to address, but it's kind of difficult if the public isn't aware that this is happening and we're not able to respond because of a lack of awareness.
Thank you so much. Give them all a round of applause, please. I want y'all to stay here. Reverend Wilson has requested that we take a group shot. Before we do that, I want to just give you all a couple of housekeeping matters. If you wanted to get CBDU credits, and some of you do, there's outside, there are some folks who will fill out the form for you right outside the registration table. Also, please come to the push meeting tomorrow. If you enjoyed Nicole Hannah Jones today, you will enjoy her even more when she comes to meeting with Reverend Jackson tomorrow. So please come to meeting tomorrow. And finally, you heard people's policy perspectives. What I would say to y'all is that you can be the most effective lobby for education that we have. It's up to us to make sure that Illinois public colleges are fully funded, but also that our federal budget, this man is going through cutting Pell, cutting child services. We want to make sure that our federal government is more responsive. It's been a delight and an honor to have all of you with us today. You are, in the words of a high school teacher, y'all dismissed. Thank you very much.